Hello and welcome to this live coding session. I'm going to be working on a new web app for the Jerry Life organization. Jerry Life is primarily focused on promoting well-being in the elder care community and healthcare systems. And we've got another web application that focuses on well-being activities for residents in institutional care homes, to make sure that they're living fulfilling lives. And we'd like to develop a complementary app that helps these institutional care homes keep track of what kind of activities the staff are doing to ensure the well-being of residents, such as what proportion of their time they spend doing laundry or preparing meals or distributing medications or other hygiene or cleaning activities, and the role of the staff who are performing these activities. Are they a nurse, or are they a practical nurse, volunteer, or other type of employee? So I've created a new project here. In general, we're sort of pivoting our software architecture over to Django. We built the Jerry Life app with Meteor.js, and it has taken us pretty far down the road. It's more often than not been a good developer experience. Certainly has gotten us off the ground, but there's just enough limitations in the Meteor application framework, batteries that are missing that are just very common, and reliance on a database, which I don't believe is necessary for our project. That I want to focus our development activities on Django. It's been around for a while. It's quite mature. It's got good architecture, batteries included, and you can use SQL databases. So what we're going to do is just scaffold a Django project. I'll just double check my Python version. Default version is 3. So that would be, we're going to create a Python environment, and this is not a tutorial. This is a live coding session, so I'm figuring out things as I go. We're developing, hopefully, a real-world application. We have historically been developing applications that are in use by hundreds of users. They're not large scale by any means, but in any case, these recipes that you see here may be useful for your own web applications. So I'm just going to create a Python virtual environment, name it env. The folder will be called environment, or env. Oops. We have to call the module, and it's going to create a new folder here called env, which contains basically your Python and pip, and any of your packages will be installed here as well. It's automatically ignored. I've used the default git ignore from GitHub, which includes Python environments and a bunch of other things. Like keep our SQLite database. I will be using SQLite for the development of this application at first, contrary to kind of popular advice to use your production database during development. I think it's too much overhead, and I haven't been bitten by the issues that arise when I know that I'm using features that are specific to our production database. I'll switch over. In any case, here's our environment. It's automatically ignored. Now we'll activate it, and now we're inside of our Python environment, and I'll install Django. I've been using a content management system for Django called Wagtail CMS. It's really excellent, really mature. It's great for a project where you'll have like an editorial content management workflow. But for this project, I don't believe we'll need many of the features that Wagtail provides. So I'm just going to keep things simple and stick with Django. Now I'm getting a notification that our file system has too many moving files, basically, that the code editor can't keep up. I think that was because a lot of things were being written to this environment folder, which is under git ignore. So for what it's, my understanding, the git should not have to worry about those. The number of files in that directory. I did open up an article on my other desktop that I can configure my file system notify to allow scanning maximum number of files that can be watched. But let's see if that continues to crop up. I'm going to ignore that for now. All right, so now we have a Django admin command, if I recall correctly. Yes. So what we can do is scaffold the Django app. We're just in a basic, basically an empty Git repo now. The git ignore license file and a README. I haven't done anything. In the main branch, I'll just create a branch called develop. And then just small changes. So it looks like, let me just refresh here. Okay, we're good, we're tracking changes. So what we can do, there's a lot of these commands I'm not familiar with. I'm learning Django as I go, just like all these other technologies that I've been using in previous podcasts or live coding sessions. So we'll start a project here. And I think it needs a name. You can change the name down the road. It's a little tricky. There's a few places where that name is interwoven. I can't remember if that underscore is okay. All right, maybe the name is implicit. Let's try this. Keyboard kind of does funny things. But a Bluetooth keyboard, and it doesn't always like the keys don't always type. It's kind of weird. Okay, so there we are. Caregivers. I'm going to rename this base folder to app. It doesn't matter. It's just a containing folder. And then this is where it's a little tricky, but by default, it scaffolds your application with a self-named folder that contains your main settings. I'm going to rename this to core, but I'm going to have to do it in a way that's a little bit careful. Core setting. So ASCII. Oh, well, this is caregivers. So core settings. again, you can do this at any time in the life of a project. But if you miss one of these, your imports won't work. So it can be a little bit daunting. But yeah, so these are in just strings, the documentation strings. They're not important. All right, so this is our initial app scaffold. Let me just okay, so then I need to change directory into the app, and from here I can run our migrations. The default migrations that are provided. Migrate. Got to keep doing this so you have muscle memory. It's easy to forget these details. And I didn't really need the migration part. Another early step we should do is create a custom user model, or at least some point before you deploy your app to production. Doing that, it's not the simplest thing. All right, so now we have a Django app running. That's great. The main thing I wanted to check is if this command would run, or if I would get errors. If I hadn't done those, renamed those files correctly, I would have had errors right off the bat. So let's go ahead and commit this initial project. Scaffold. I don't have any kind of wireframes or design documents for this project, which is probably not the best approach. But essentially, the architecture and user experience is going to be very similar to our well-being activity tracker. The context is just going to be slightly different. People will, instead of logging well-being activities like going outdoors, doing art or music, pet therapy, for residents in elder care institutions, these are end-of-life care, typically so far for residents with dementia spectrum disorders. So it's full-time assisted living facilities, but who are committed to helping people live fulfilling lives in their care. So it's really important those well-being activities become visible. Otherwise, people might sit around and kind of languish, or be inadvertently neglected, or sort of atrophy beyond the normal course of aging and dementia. So on the flip side of that, these institutions need to know how the staff are spending their time, not on an individual level. This is not about watching this employee or that employee, but on a broad level. What proportion of their time is spent doing laundry or cleaning or food preparation. And hopefully this will be a complement and potentially integrated with these well-being activities. So the institutions will have a more holistic understanding and awareness of the activities that are being conducted. So let's see. I don't have a mock-up, but I have a pretty good idea of the direction I want to go. This is a prototype, so it would potentially evolve over time. I just want to have something to demonstrate in about a week's time. Excellent. So our first order of business would be, again, I should have thought this through a little bit in advance. We'll be creating an app essentially to log activities, I think, at this point. These activities will essentially have a start and end date time, activity type, and a role. The activity type would be those I mentioned earlier, like if they were doing cleaning or food preparation or giving medication. The role would be the role of the employee. And these should be defined, I think, through the administrative interface, not statically. So I'll need at least 3 tables. Or if they're done static, if they're defined in a static manner, we'll need to localize them. We'll have to make that decision down the road, but for right now, I'm just going to get something shipped. And localization can occur both when you're in your code base as well as in the database. So we can add localization, but I'm based in Finland here. Our company's based in Finland. I'm going to be developing in English, but yeah, we'll have to keep an eye to localizing the code base. So yeah, I think the app will just be called activities. App names, I believe the convention is they're plural, and then table names or the model that you define will be singular. So at this point I can say Django admin or Python manage py activities. But already I have a good feeling about this. You know, again, I really think I'm grateful that Meteor is around and was around when we started developing Jerry Life. But it had just enough shortcomings that we're pivoting away, and I'm really grateful that Django has been around for so long and has batteries included, ethos, the Python language, and gives you clear kind of guidelines how to structure your app and everything else. So here's our app scaffold for the activities app. And their guidelines, you can deviate from them. Like I don't need to check all of these into Git. Actually, I shouldn't be committing directly to develop, but okay. Let's continue. So basically each app and that's going to be a little bit confusing, isn't it? I'll rename this to project to be consistent with the Django nomenclature. All right, so a Django project consists of one or more apps. That's the thing here. So just to get a little bit of a broad overview, we have a GitHub repository that contains all of our files, some of which are being ignored. The folders that are gray are ignored because we don't want to check everything, and there's certain environmental things or the database that you don't really keep in your version control. These env files can also contain sensitive information like passwords and things, so those are ignored as well. So we've got a GitHub repository, a Django project, which consists of manage py. Here's the database, which is also being ignored, and one or more directories. This subdirectory here is a core, I guess it's an app. These are basically Python modules though. This core directory has a special purpose of containing settings and the primary URLs and the web server gateway interface, or asynchronous web server gateway interface, which we don't typically have to touch. We come in here sometimes to modify settings, which I'm going to do right now. In fact, I just installed an app, and you come back to these over the course of development. Not scroll so fast. Okay, so I'm just going to I'm not going to get too ceremonial here. I'll put ours at the end. I'm going to add our activities app. And I'm going to format the document using black. I'm going to introduce that early in the project. It's an opinionated formatter. Lately, I've been looking at Dart and Flutter, and I think it's pretty nice that comes with a formatter and a lot of other utilities that I guess improve the developer experience right out of the box. I'm very impressed by the Dart language. I was hesitant to look at it for a long time. And we might potentially start doing some Dart and Flutter development for these web applications. In any case, Django has apps. Each app is defined in a folder. They are just Python modules, more or less. I mean, literally, I guess. But they're relative to this managed Py context. They're modules, not relative to the project directory. Sometimes the code editor gets a little bit confused by that. When you're trying to load a module, it says it can't detect it because it's looking in the env and relative to the root directory, perhaps. In any case, every time you scaffold an app, you need to just add it to your installed apps. And I'm going to leave everything else alone for now. And we're going to start defining a couple of models. Basically, apps have a file that you can define the administrative interface, which is automatically generated by Django. It lets you kind of interact with the database. It's not for end users typically. You've got your default app settings or your app config here. And models, tests, and views. A model is an interface to interact with the database and in an object-oriented manner. Tests are for like unit and functional tests. Hopefully I won't neglect those for too long, but this is a prototype. I'm not going to pursue test-driven development by any means, and I might not be writing many tests. I'm not really sure how to test the default Django models. I kind of just trust that things work. And views are essentially the way you get data out of the database to a template on the client. And we're going to look more into these. I'm going to be reading the Django docs a lot because I don't remember most of this stuff off the top of my head. So if you've got any questions, feel free. I'm monitoring the live chat over here, and feel free to speak up, or if you have questions or comments, or if you just want to chat about any idle banter is fine as well, about web development in general, Python development. So I think we're going to need 3 models. So basically, we'll have activity, facilitator role, but not facilitator role, and activity type. And I guess would it be staff role or what's the participant role? And that kind of begs the question, could there be multiple participants in an activity? It makes sense. It depends on there's just trade-offs. It depends on the user experience, how granular of data is needed, what kind of questions they're going to ask. For now, I'll keep it 1 activity, 1 person, 1 role. Just for simplicity. All right, so that's what we're going to define at first. These are defined in models, in classes. So we'll start it with the dependent classes. We've got activity type. It's just inheriting from the Django and default models, model class. And fields on the class correspond to database columns. So we're going to have title or name, probably title. This is a wagtail convention. Naming things, it's kind of activity type title, activity type name, activity type thing title, participant role name, participant role title. And you can refactor these. And you can localize them as well. There's extensions that allow people to, you know, if they're using multiple languages in putting data into the database for multiple languages, you can do that. You can have localized models. And essentially an activity type is just a model title. That's all I can think of at the moment. So this one method I'm going to define is this string method. Is it self or this? Yeah. In the diff. And this is a special class in the Python data model that when you're interacting with a class, an entity, an instance, and you just print it, for example, or you display it in the user interface, by default, Python will run this string function, the double underscore stir method to get the string representation of that entity. And I'm just going to duplicate this participant role here. And I'm doing this semi-alphabetically, but I'm going to define the activity last because it depends on both of those previous classes. There should be two. There we go. I don't know what J is. Why does it keep recommending J? What is that? No, why does it keep recommending that? It's getting a bit annoying. All right, I'm just going to define, I guess I'll define these one at a time. That way my migrations will be more granular. And so I need to go into the project folder, manage Py, and make migrations. And essentially, in Django Migrations, take a database structure from one state or structure to another. So we started off with basically an empty database, then we migrated to add some of the Django tables for user authentication and things like that, which we'll swing back to. And then we created a new app and now a new table called activity type that has an implicit ID. We didn't have to define that, but every row in your database should have a primary key. And Django is doing this. It is auto field. I don't know if it's, I think it uses integer by default. You can do universally unique ID fields if you want, but I'm just going to let Django do the default behavior. I don't think these are sensitive. The ID is not going to sort of, to my knowledge, be useful information that somebody could exploit. And then the title field, which is the character field we define in code. All right, so that's the first model. Just commit these changes. So we need to update our get ignore to ignore .vs code. There might already be. One for IDEs basically. So I don't need to check my VS Code settings into GitHub or into Git, but all it did was added this telling VS Code to use black, and so that when I run that formatter command, it's going to use the black Python black module. So let me refresh this now. Ignore VS Code. So add activity type. Sure. There we go. Double 2 line breaks. It's activity type, right? So again, the models are singular because each instance and represents a single row in the database, single entity. So you define your class as singular, that way it reflects more naturally this more semantically what you're dealing with. There are plural methods underneath activity type that let you fetch multiple of them. All right, so now we're going to close a couple of things. Just put this back in there and format. I wouldn't format and save, but okay. Then we're going to add the participant role. Model. And what I'm doing is I'm going to use a field, a consistent field. And that way it's easier to remember when I'm working down the line, and also code can get more generic, like template code and things like that. It might come in handy to just be consistent across your models. And finally, we're going to add activity model. And this one's a little different than the others. And this is where one of our main design decisions are that could have really long lasting impact on the project. But essentially what we're wanting, the goal of this is to measure the proportion of time that participants spend in various activities. So what proportion of time or percentage of their time do nurses spend doing food preparation or housekeeping type of things? Because they're doing all of these. They do many different types of activities. So we're wanting to measure that percentage of time. So that means we need to measure duration. If we were just doing a percentage of activities, then I could just get an activity type in our participant role, and we could just count those. But some activities are pretty fast, quick to do, and others take longer. So I believe the duration of the activity is going to be relevant here. And then the next design decision is how to collect the duration. Are we asking for the date or time that they started the activity and that they stopped, or are we asking them to input the duration they spent in minutes or hours? Combination of those, or is there a single way to do it? And basically they're not mutually exclusive either. For example, we can design forms and A/B test them, test one design against another. One form that allows them to put in a start date and time, and another, hey, William Muriuki, welcome. We are designing an application for caregivers in elder care homes. These are institutional care homes for people with Alzheimer's and dementia spectrum disorders. It's basically end-of-life care, full-time assisted living, and people will live in these homes on the order of months or years, but typically months. And these are both public or private sector institutions. There's a lot of the public sector here in Finland. And the residents, there can be thousands of residents in these homes. And so we're designing an application to track, as I was mentioning a moment ago, how the staff and caregivers are spending their time, the proportion of time that's dedicated to various activities at an aggregate level and not an individual level. We're not trying to single out any in particular staff member. The institution needs just to know broadly how staff are spending their time so they can make decisions about hiring particular roles, for example, or like staffing related decisions. This is a complementary app to another one we built, and that's actually been deployed in an institutional care system with about 5,000 residents. And the other app tracks well-being activities. So we make sure that residents are living fulfilling lives, doing things above and beyond just the basic Maslowian needs or something. So they're getting health, hygiene, taken care of by the nurses, but also able to go outside, enjoy the nature, do art and music, reminiscing, pet therapy, those types of activities. So yeah, we're trying to get a holistic view of the inner workings of these care homes, and we need really that simple software tools can be really good instruments to promote quality of life, and for both the residents and the staff of these care homes and institutional care systems. So basically, staff are doing activities here, and I think I'm just going to use a complementary approach where we can collect both the start and end dates. They would be non-mandatory fields. The staff can also just enter the number of minutes, duration in minutes directly, and we can see what's more natural. And from there, we can design different user experiences, also to see how that affects reporting. But I believe we're going to need these durations for the types of reports that we've been producing. By the way, William, this code is open source on GitHub if you're interested, and I do these live streams. If you're building an app of your own, I can take a look at your app, and you feel free also to use any of these patterns in your apps as well if you've got ideas. So I believe these will have start and end equals models. So activity start, and I believe this would be date time field. Activity start and end, and we're going to load this in the Django administrative UI in a moment, so you can see how the Django automatically gives you a form and interface to input data and kind of sanity check your model really quick. So I believe activity end equals the same date time field, and duration for now can be, I'll leave it out. I'll make it what's called a property, which is a way that you can make a function that behaves like a static member of a class. It abstracts it a bit, because I believe the duration in minutes or hours can be derived from the time delta here. We're going to have activity type equals, so this is relating to another table, so we're going to use a foreign key here, and 2 equals, and I believe it's just going to be, since it's in the same, you can put it in a string or directly to class. I believe this should work. since, you know, I'd either import the class, or since it's in the same file, you would make a reference directly to it. Let's double check that in a moment when I run the migrations. And then participant role. And I'm just being consistent with my naming here. This activity type, participant role. Foreign key. 2. I think that's all we need for this model. I'll make the property for the activity duration. And ultimately, the activity duration is going to be what they're going to track. And we'll have to look into some things when we get to the reporting part, because just having these raw data, big tables of data, is not useful. We're going to want to run some aggregations and data visualizations on our Jerry Life well-being instrument. Also, we've done extensive work on visualizing the data and putting it in meaningful context and form. So let's make these migrations. Okay, here we go. On delete. Okay, yes. So since this is a foreign key, Django needs to know, and our database needs to know what happens when you delete the related entity. So if I have an activity of a particular activity type, what happens when I delete that activity type from the database? What I think it would do, so what should it delete the related activities? You know, that can be destructive, but it's called a cascading delete, and sometimes that's what you want. In this case, I think I want it to protect it. I believe we want to play it safe by default. On delete equals models and protect. You can protect, so that doesn't allow the delete to occur. You can cascade, which would delete the first entity and every other related entity cascadingly. And then you can delete, you can set null, which would leave these kind of orphaned activities that don't have, in this case, an activity type. And that's also not useful for reporting purposes, because we're going to want to aggregate these and display charts, categorical charts of the proportion of time the caregivers are spending in various activity types. So this should, no, didn't work. Okay. Oh, so I didn't save it. I was like, wait a minute. There we go. Very cool. Easy mistakes, and that's basically the way of the gun. Just making mistakes, lots of mistakes, more mistakes than successes some days, but learning from those. And let's go ahead and add a doc string here. Conducted is the right word, but in any case, I'll refresh this, get those changes in. Add. All right, so now we've got actually these database tables defined, and migrations specifically defined to get us from more or less an empty database to a database with 3 tables. Let's run those migrations. And the last thing I'm going to do, so that just created the tables for us. I'm going to create a super user. And simple password. We're going to run the server, and we're going to take a look at the Django admin, the Django administrative interface, and get these models into the admin UI. I think that'll be a good stopping point for tonight. All right, so never save. In any case, here's the default Django administration user interface. What it'll do is automatically generate forms and tables that allow you to view and interact with the data in your application, the models you want. to expose here. By default, it gives us an administrative user interface to interact with users in groups of users, which we're not going to make, we might not make use of right now. I don't think we'll make use of it all, in fact, but as you can see, there's nothing else here. None of these models that we defined are appearing in the user interface. So we're just going to go to the Django docs and register these 3 models with the Django administration interface. It's not too many lines of code. I just don't know it off the top of my head. Well, that's another thing that's just really remarkable about Django. The extent of the documentation is superb. So we're going to customize the admin user interface. Which also, I've been working with Flutter, as I mentioned earlier, and Flutter and Dart, and I've been very impressed by not only the language design in the framework, but also the documentation. Again, I might be building a Flutter app that would interface with this project. So here we've included basically in our core project settings, we've installed the Django admin user interface, as well as this authentication framework and some other things here, handling sessions, static files, and sending messages to the user when events happen. And so that's what has basically enabled me to authenticate and access this administrative user interface. Now what we're going to do is customize this admin UI, and we're going to create what's called a model admin, and that is defined here in our app, our related app, in the app admin section. And then, so they've already imported the admin for us here. I'm going to import the model. It's a relative import, so I'm not going to use the absolute path here. I think that's okay. And we're going to import 3 models, so I'm just going to put these in a tuple, I don't know how you pronounce that. We have, what do we have? Activity type, role, we'll do participant role, that's right. And in this case, I can just import them alphabetically because they're all going to be in the main namespace. All right, so now we've got all of those imported in, and I'm just going to register them. I'm going to create a model admin for each of these and register. Now there's a decorator that makes it just a little bit more clean. Basically, you define a class that contains your model name, and admin suffix, I think, is just a convention. Makes it clear it inherits from the model admin. And here they're not doing anything. I'll probably just do the same thing. You have to have at least something inside of your body of your class. And then you call this admin site register. Now it's slightly, I think, more elegant to do this admin register model name approach. And so I'll do that. So admin activity, and we can create a group. Yeah, use class. Activity model admin, activity admin. I'm gonna do model admin. And I'm just gonna paste this twice so I can avoid too many typos. You know, copy and paste can be a dangerous thing. I've caught myself up on it many times, not, you know, pasting stuff that I don't understand and then not being able to figure out how it works. That's Control D. You can do multi-cursor. You select one, and then you can select that multiple times, and then edit all of those simultaneously. Control D or Command D. So essentially, what this should do without models is not defined, and this admin, not models. So I've got my imports. This is, well, I actually had an initial typo, and then I copy and pasted my typo. So there we go, format. All right, looking good. And I believe, you don't need to migrate anything. We should be able to now refresh. Oh, by the way, here's our project. And this, everything here is open source. All of our projects. I'm currently working on the Caregivers app. So if you're interested, you can visit our GitHub repositories. And I'm working in the develop branch. I haven't pushed any code up here, but I will be sure to push the code at the end of this live coding session. Now if we refresh this page, now you can see it registered the activities app and automatically gave us a little header section to kind of group those together and alphabetize these in an interesting way. That's fine. I'm not going to get too stressed about that. Another thing that it's doing here that you can see, so we got activity types, it's pluralizing these because we're defining our models as singular activity type and activity. Those are singular, and Django needs to, or as a convenience, it pluralizes things, but it doesn't always do it correctly because it doesn't know grammar fundamentally. Basically just appends an S to it. So what we can do is define the plural, and that's, I believe, under meta. Let's go ahead and search for that. Model meta. So this app label is being used here, activities. DB table is kind of nice if you want to keep your database clean. By default, Django will prefix all of your database tables with the app name and then the model name. And likewise, table space, I think lets you put things in schemas. I'm not sure most of these. Django is really robust, and I'm just impressed the deeper I get into it with the amount of detail that's gone into it. What we're looking for is plural. And ordering, this is, we're going to be coming back to this if we need to set things in a different order, like activity date. If you want to organize them by the date in reverse chronological, for example, that's what they're doing here, reverse chronological date. Oops, I'm not printing, Control F, Control Print, plural. All right, verbose name, plural. So we've got verbose name, a human readable name for an object, singular. I think these verbose names are pretty good. Django is saying, is going to know it just activity type, participant role, but the plural is where it's kind of getting caught up here. So if we go back to our models, and for the one that it's getting caught up on the activity, we'll go to and create a subclass. Activities, and when we refresh this page, I think that's all it's needed, and then it alphabetizes it correctly. So that was a kind of a quick way of spotting that it was something wrong with the pluralization by the virtue that it was alphabetizing wrong. So activities, activity types, and participant roles, looking good. What it also does is gives you a table, a view listing all of these things. We haven't entered any data into the database. Now, I'm not going to be able to add an activity because the activity type is required, but let's do today and now, but actually let's do 1 hour ago. And then today and now, and activity type, I don't have any options, but what I can do is say cleaning. Create one. When I save it, it just puts it right in there. That is super nice. Unfortunately, this admin user interface is not designed for general end user, so you have to kind of end up re-implementing all of this stuff, including this nice JavaScript logic. But in any case, it is what it is. So participant role would be, let's call it nurse. They have a nurse, practical nurse, and volunteer, and probably some other roles. In this case, let's go ahead and save this. So cleaning, a nurse. And so here you can see it's displaying now the data I've inputted into the database, but it just knows that this is an activity object. So what I need to do is define a stir model here, what we would like to see by default. And I can't just, again, copy and paste because this title doesn't work here. I can copy and paste most of it, but just, again, be aware of what we're copying and pasting. And for now, I will, there's two things I'm going to do. I'm going to define this stir method, and then we're going to actually display columns here. So I'm going to use Python F string that lets me use interpolated values. And it would be something like role type. Got a typo there, but let me get that. It's just a second. And now if I refresh this page, that we're returning a function, an F string, we're returning a string from this stir method. It should then fix that nurse cleaning. But moreover, what we actually want to do probably is put those in separate columns. This is going to showcase some of the really nice nuances of the Django administrative user interface. Also illustrate why it's kind of unfortunate that this is not for general end users. All right, so what we're going to do is set up some options, such as the date hierarchy. Now, we're entering data that's going to span across weeks and months and potentially years. So Django admin for activity can include hierarchical date browser. Here we go. And data pub date, which does not exist. Yes, this is again why copying and pasting is dangerous. Danger. And we've only got one activity, but you can see that it was in 2021, March 21. So it's going to give us a nice browser interface, kind of a breadcrumb style. What else do we have? How do I do columns here? You can have search indexing added, uniqueness constraints, which is pretty cool combination of unique fields unique together. What I'm looking for is the columns. Permissions. Oh, this is in the wrong documents. Admin. Oh, I'm over here, so I'm going to close the model admin stuff. But that was cool to learn about model admin actions. And fields, here we go. So if I define a tuple of fields, equals, and then it'll actually display these as columns in a table. So we've got start. Now let's see. Participant role. Did we type? Start and end. Now it won't need to use the dunder stir method because it'll have everything. Okay. Ah, that's for the form. So that was not actually something else, another property here. Yeah, so the rendered form, it was already working. If I add an activity, it shows them. You can control the order of the fields that way. So maybe I'll just leave it if that's more natural. Yeah, makes sense. Admin actions. These are cool. It's such a nice administrative interface, generally speaking. Form field overrides, inline. list display. Here we go, table display. So essentially, this is, I'm going to duplicate this, but call it list display. And see if I refresh here, go back to the activities, and there you go. Now you can see the participant role, activity type. And the interesting thing is we got a foreign key. Oh, that links to the activity itself. I gotcha. Very cool. So we're able to now input data to test our model, see if it makes sense. But what we're lacking is basically a user interface for regular users. So that'll be the next step. I'm not going to introduce any front-end frameworks or anything advanced like Flutter or Vue.js or anything. I'm going to keep to basic Django templates, maybe some light JavaScript and CSS. And for that, I'll probably want to start with some basic wireframes to get an idea of how the input would be designed. But yes, so let's go ahead and recap here. So in today's live code session, we scaffolded an initial project, Django project. We renamed a few things, the directories and the core directory that contains the settings and URLs. In order to do that, we had to go through in all of the places and change the imports. Once you've done that, it's you don't have to worry about it afterwards. Then we created one app and defined 3 models. So this is the app to track activities relating to, essentially sanitation, hygiene, kind of the fundamental needs. So food, clothing, shelter, sanitation, hygiene type of activities to complement our other well-being activity tracker. And we want to know what staff role is doing this, not the staff member, but just generally, are they a nurse or a practical nurse, which is slightly less skilled nurse. And then sometimes you might have other types of roles and maybe volunteers. I'm not sure if these types of activities would be conducted by volunteers, but what the type of activity was. So were they, for example, cleaning, it was a nurse. That's all the data I've entered in here. So essentially our models are very simple. We're just inheriting from the Django model, and we're defining a character field for title of activity type. And also being consistent across models is useful, as we'll see down the road. So the participant role model also has a title field. And that it makes it easy to remember, but also makes it possible to write more generic and reusable code, particularly if you have convergent code paths across models or even apps, which as the app grows, that's increasingly likely to happen. And finally, we're going to log activities. This is our more complex model, so to speak, or complicated. It's got more parts to it. We want to record the duration of activities either directly or indirectly, so allowing the user to input the activity duration themselves or a start and end date time and calculating that from those in minutes or hours. What the type of activity was is a foreign key that points to the corresponding table. Again, I'm using consistent names here to make the code easier to understand and follow. And participant role is also a foreign key to participant roles. So when you define activity type, cleaning is the one I've defined in a participant role, nurse, you can add an activity. Select those. And let's do this one also. For a little bit and then save it. So that's about it. We also encountered a couple of quirks where in order to print things in the user interface, I don't know if they're quirks, but they're just nuances you have to handle. Django needs to know how to represent something as a string. This is a part of the Python data model. So we use this understir or string method so that anytime you're representing one of these database entities in a user interface, in this case Django knows where to get the string representation from. We define that in both the activity type and participant role models, as well as this activity model. But another thing that was happening is the Django by default doesn't know much about or anything about English grammar. So to pluralize something, it basically adds an S. So activities plural would be activitys, which is not grammatical. So here we just tell Django, by defining a subclass of the model, what the verbose name for plural activity entities would be called, and it's able to then display it properly and automatically in the user interface. I didn't have to write any of this markup or the JavaScript relating to if I, for example, I'm adding an activity and I want to create a new participant role, such as practical learners, and then another activity type such as, they don't administer medication, but let's say hygiene. I don't even know how to spell hygiene. Something like that, right? E-N-E, of course. Very cool. Once I've spelled that wrong and corrected it, then it's oh, it won't let me make that mistake again. So 1842, and save that. So now we've got more data in the database. So that's essentially how far we've gotten today. And again, the verbose name plural. I'm sorry, the verbose name plural was what gives it the pluralization, and Django framework is what gives us all this JavaScript that automatically opened the modal dialog and populated this select list with the new options and selected the correct option. It's really remarkable. Unfortunately, Django administrative interface is not intended for the general end user, so we'll have to essentially design that from scratch. All right. Well, thank you very much for viewing this live code session. It's been nice to have some visitors in the chat. William, hope to see you around again. And if you want to view this code, it's open source on GitHub at JerryLife. GitHub.com/JerryLife/caregivers. I will paste it in the chat in case, again, people are wanting to access the link and maybe are viewing this stream later. Great. Well, thank you very much again for your time. Hope you're doing well out there. Have a great day.